Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hi, guys. This is your host, Alicia Dibrell from Insight Media. And today I get the privilege to interview Tracy Hauser. Tracy has over 30 years of real estate experience in the California market. She helps both buyers and sellers with the real estate transaction. But today she's going to talk to us about what to expect when selling a property in either probate or a property held in trust. She will go into great detail on what to expect when dealing with this type of transaction. Tracy's compassion and patient temperament, combined with her experience and drive, makes her for one of the top real estate agents in the California market. So without further ado, I want to welcome Tracy Hauser to the show. Hi, Tracy. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Alicia. Thank you for the nice introduction. That was lovely.
Oh, it was my pleasure. 30 years, that's a long time. You have so much passion and so much experience. But let's get into this interview. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you come from?
Sure. I was actually raised in Woodland Hills, California, and I moved out to Santa Clarita when I was very pregnant with my second child back in 1982. I kind of came out here kicking and screaming, thinking, where am I going? And didn't take long before I realized what a fabulous place this was to raise a family. So my husband and I raised 4 great kids, and I have 5 grandchildren with baby number 6 coming this spring. And as you can probably tell, family life is a really big deal to me. And I also strongly believe in giving back to the community that has allowed me to support my family and raise my family, and kind of want to keep passing that legacy along. So I very much volunteer in town, and actually everyone on my team does volunteer work too. It's kind of a requirement of being part of my tribe.
And how many people do you have on your team?
There's 5 of us. I have a gal that's been with me for over 21 years. She basically navigates and runs the escrow, and Denise has been a licensed agent since 1988. Then I have some buyer's agents, and they both list and sell property, but they're strongest in working with buyers. And then I have another fella, Ashley and Stacy, work with us, and then Jim also works with us. And Jim is newer to the team. He's just come on the last 2 years. He's been a roofing contractor for 30 years and is phasing out of that career and phasing into real estate, partly because he has a huge knowledge of real estate from the top and a fabulous base of clients that trust him. And coming onto my team made it very easy for him to start making this transition so he can kind of stand on my shoulders of 30 years real estate marketing experience and relationships, and his clients get the benefit of all that, plus they get Jim.
Hi. So can you tell me a little bit about who do you help and how do you help them?
Sure. Well, basically we help lots of families and individuals, both buying houses and selling houses, and a lot of times we're doing both. They're selling one property to buy another. And then we kind of help everyone in between. I've helped investors. I've helped developers. Back in the 2006, 7, and 8, I did a lot of what we call foreclosure. The slang term is REOs, which stands for real estate owned properties, and the other word people know that as is foreclosures. That too was a very sensitive market because a lot of times I had to go to the home of the people that were losing their home and do a process called cash for keys. And again, that was not a lot of fun for anybody in the equation. And then we did also, when that market cleared up, we also did what we call the short sale market, where people were upside down in their homes, and we helped them as compassionately as possible leave a home they didn't want to leave. So the team and I have weaved in a lot of the experiences we've had over the years into helping our clients basically from a very personal aspect. We are very much personal service oriented versus transaction oriented. So we don't tout ourselves as number one this or number one that. We are more focused on how do we serve our clients to the best and highest needs of their families.
So I know today we're going to be talking about whether if you're trying to sell houses in probate or that you're selling a house that's in a trust. What is the difference between them?
Yes. Okay. That's such a great question. A probate is when a person dies without having a trust, and sometimes they can have a will, but having a will does not keep the property out of probate court. And what happens with probate court is basically a judge oversees the liquidation of the deceased property. And of course, it will be distributed to the heirs. And there's a lot of different situations that could happen. And I won't go into all those. What I would strongly recommend is if somebody has a loved one, like a baby boomer or people that have children, I would strongly recommend that they seek out talking to a trust attorney, because this is probably one of the most loving things you can do for your family while you're on this side. A trust basically keeps your house and other assets out of probate. And basically what it is, it's a written directive that tells who gets what, how much, when, and there's nobody making those decisions for you. Where in the case of a probate, there's a judge overseeing everything. There's a lot of costs that are involved with a probate. A probate sale can cost anywhere between 2 to 4% in attorney fees, and that's of the overall value of the estate. So that could get pretty pricey. And then there's still court filing fees. And this process can take, depending on how complicated someone's situation is, this can take anywhere from 6 to 18 months, where in the case of a trust, there's no reason to go to court. It's all been handled. It's all in a written document, basically a written directive called a trust. And the trustee of the trust will administer everything as written down by the person before they passed away.
Okay, that brings me to the next question. So when somebody's making the decisions on what to do with a property once they pass, what are some key points to consider before making that decision and how to handle everything?
Well, first and foremost is I would recommend that you talk to your tax planner, estate planner, if you have an estate planner, and explore what your personal situation is. In some cases, like for instance, when my mom passed away, she didn't own any real estate. She had a paid for car that was 20 years old, and she lived with me. So in her case, it didn't make sense to do a trust. There was nothing to distribute to anyone. On the other hand, my dad owns a couple properties. He has a huge stock account, numerous material items, and thank God he does have a trust, and everything is written down in that. So when his time comes, my brother and I know exactly what to do. So when people are thinking about this, it's always the best step to start with a professional in that field. So again, I would start first with talking to your accountant about, hey, here's where we're at. Let the accountant kind of guide you. And then once you buy a property and you start accumulating different material assets, it is a very good idea to even pay a couple $100 and sit down with a trust attorney and find out what's involved with that process.
So, okay. So, kind of take the guidance of the professionals available.
Absolutely.
Okay. So tell me this. If one spouse survives another, does that automatically make it go into probate?
Well, that's another really good question, Alicia. One of the things that can happen is a spouse can be accidentally put into probate. And here's a common situation. A lot of times people will refinance their homes, and maybe one spouse or the other has some credit issues for some reason or the other. And they've taken that spouse off of title to refinance the home so they can get a better interest rate. And that's not a big deal. This is done all the time. And then the escrow closes, and they forget to put that spouse back on title, which would protect their interest in the property. And there have been cases where spouses have passed and the other spouse was not on title. There was no will, there was no trust, there was no nothing. And that spouse would be subjected to going through a probate sale. Even though they have ownership in the house, it just wasn't legally recorded. So these are things that can happen to people, and they happen all the time. And unfortunately, it happens because of lack of education, or somebody just got busy and forgot to take care of an extremely important detail. Owning real estate is a very complicated thing, and there can be some huge liabilities if you don't handle it properly. And that would be something that could really cause somebody a lot of upset for no reason other than just something got forgot. So that's something that we caution our families all the time when they're doing refinances and someone's being taken off title. We remind them, make sure you put your partner back on title so they're not put in this predicament.
Yeah, I could imagine that would be, it takes my breath away even thinking about it. You've worked your whole life to have this house with your spouse, and then something like just a simple piece of paper can, have it ripped out from underneath you. Not only losing your house, now you lose your spouse and your house.
Yeah, well, and the other thing too is just a little sidebar, which I just thought I'd interject in this conversation is, a lot of times, when families, we have lots of blended families these days where someone's been divorced and then they get remarried. And these are the times that a trust is extremely important, because if you had built wealth through assets of real estate and other instruments like stock accounts or bank accounts or other investments, you would absolutely want a written directive of what you want to go to who, versus leave it up to somebody else's judgment after you're no longer here. People kind of change after people pass, and there's a lot of heartache and unnecessary upset that could be prevented if these things were put into a trust. A trust can resolve a lot of unnecessary upset. So children can be accidentally disinherited in the absence of a trust.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see how, things do change, and especially when there's a lot of money or assets on the table, you would like to think that everybody would do the right thing, but to make sure that everything is done the way you want it beforehand is the best way to go, definitely.
Yeah, I can't stress enough how important it is, again, when somebody has children, and again, there's a blended family, it's absolutely, I think, your responsibility to your children to put what you want them to have in a trust, because you just leave too much up to, there's too much up for grabs. And again, it can be all avoided.
So what is an executor, and what are the duties? Or is that for a trust and probate, or is it one or one of the other?
Well, an executor, again, great question. An executor is somebody that is either named in a will, or, they're named in a will, and they can be named in the trust as well, but mostly the will. And if, for instance, if someone goes into probate and they have a will, there's an executor that's been established by the person that passes. Like, for instance, your mom puts you in her will and she says, I want Alicia to be the executor of my estate. So boom, there you are. If the person dies in what we call intestate, meaning they have no will or trust, then a judge will assign an administrator to administer out the property. And in both cases, the executor and the administrator have to check in with the court and let them know how things are going. And they actually have to show an accounting of what's being sold, and they have to get appraisals on things. And there's a lot of work. It's actually a very big job, and there's a lot of liability, because the executor or administrator has a fiduciary duty to the heirs to keep their highest and best interests at heart. So, for instance, let's say there was a car that was worth $20,000, but the executor's like, I'm busy. I live in Arizona and the car's in California. I'll just put it on Craigslist and, sell it fast. Well, they could actually be held liable for being negligent in their duties. So there's actually, when people are doing this, they take on this task, they actually take on a big responsibility.
Okay, so how would I start a probate case, or do I need a lawyer for that? Is that something I can do on my own?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. In all states except for California and Michigan, Wisconsin, forgive me. Got my states mixed up. California and Wisconsin, you can do your own probate. The other states, you are required to have an attorney. And my advice is, because of the responsibility, it's probably a good idea to seek an attorney. Now, again, if you were an only child and your parent passed away and there's nobody to argue with. You're it. There's nothing to discuss with anybody. If there are other heirs and people that could possibly bring you to task on how you're handling things, it's very wise to have the guidance of an attorney. And yes, it's kind of a bummer. You have to pay for that. But in the big picture, it would be a good decision.
And how long does that process typically take?
Probate can take anywhere, depending on how complicated somebody's estate is, that can take anywhere from 6 to 18 months.
So it's not a quick process by any means.
It is not. And it is not a fun process. When you should be grieving the loss of your person, you're all of a sudden thrown headlong into some accounting and administrative tasks that you have no idea what you're doing. and it can be a tremendous task.
So once a decision is made by the court, and then what are the key decisions that need to be made, or does the court handle everything?
For instance, it'll be decided, okay, the property needs to be liquidated. So the executor or the administrator gets a real estate agent, in the probate, the court will actually, if there's, in some cases, the court will have to approve the sale of the property, and they will set the price based on the appraised value, and it has to be in a certain percentage of the appraised value. And again, that kind of varies from state to state, and I know this is a national program, so just for broad sweeping information, so that's one process. The other thing is if there's valuables, cars, jewelry, things like that, all that stuff has to be accounted for and appraised. Value has to be given to it. So, for instance, there's an art collection. You need to find somebody that can appraise the art and say, okay, this is worth about $20,000. And then there's somebody watching over to make sure things are liquidated in a responsible, accountable way.
If you could give one piece of advice to somebody facing a probate situation with a property, what would that be?
Well, honestly, I would tell them, get a good probate attorney. Seek the counsel of somebody that can guide you through this process. Because again, if you happen to be the named executor or you're appointed as the administrator, you actually have some pretty significant liability doing this. It's not, you are very accountable, and you have to do a very responsible job, because again, the heirs could put you at task for not handling the property correctly. I actually have a listing right now where there's I think it's 5 or 6 siblings, and the sibling that is in charge is now being questioned by the other siblings. Is she doing the right things? And that they believe it or not, people can take legal action on you for mishandling that type of a job. So again, it can be a very big deal. I also recommend that people do group conversations, for instance, talk to the family members and things that aren't of real significant value, like little knickknacks and trinkets. Find out who wants what. Do the best you can to keep, to accommodate everybody, and at the same time, the person doing this obviously probably has a life too, and a job and a family. So, setting up a weekend where the family can come take turns picking things that are of value, that mean something to them, and then also setting aside the things that actually have some material value that should be sold, and the proceeds split between the family. So there's, again, depending on the extent of what's being liquidated, there's a couple different types of ways of handling it that could reduce a lot of stress and heartache for people versus just steamrolling in and saying, okay, I'm in charge and I'm doing it this way.
Yeah, I can imagine there's probably a lot of that with the older sibling syndrome happening.
Yeah. That's right.
Okay, so if I have a home or a property and it is in my will, is that the same thing? Or will that avoid probate or?
No. A will, all a will do is at least give some written directive to who you want to have what, but it still will have to be probated. A will is better than than nothing at all. But a will, I'll kind of reframe this. Trusts have wills in them. So you have your will in the body of the trust, but a will without a trust isn't the same instrument. Just a will on its own will not prevent a probate sale. And I think there's a lot, people have a big misconception about that. And again, that's why it's so important to talk to an attorney, and especially an estate attorney, because not all attorneys put together trust.
Definitely hire an attorney and get a trust, so that way they keep all the bickering and everything is laid out, and there'll be no surprises after you're gone.
Yes. And the other thing that can be in a trust is there's also what we call medical directives. So God forbid you're on life support or something happens. When your family is under that kind of stress, I'll give an example. Somebody's in a car accident and they're breathing, but they're brain damaged, and there's no hope for any improvement in your life. Nobody wants to be the one that has to say pull the plug. But if it's in the written directive, in the medical directive, that person has already said, if this happens, do this. So no one has to bear the load of guilt of making a decision of, am I doing the right thing? It's already been decided by that person. Do this for me. And again, the word trust, they're trusting you will follow their written directive.
And what's one really good piece of advice you can give somebody who's left with the property in a trust?
Again, the same thing with the property in the trust. It's a good idea to get together with the heirs, find out what items have sentimental value, and if at all possible, everybody's there at the same time and no one's feeling like they've been cheated or somebody's hogging everything. And then again, come to common ground with, hey, look, mom's china cabinet is really worth that's worth $10,000. We're not going to give that to somebody. Sometimes people will actually buy things and give it into the estate because it's got significant value. Other times, like I said, talking about people's knickknacks, they really don't have any material value, but they have huge sentimental value. It's wise to keep the peace and distribute those things as everybody wants. But again, big expensive price tag things, no, they're not going to be given out to somebody because that needs to be liquidated or bought to go back into the trust to be divided amongst all the heirs. So again, there's so many different scenarios, but that's kind of a good example to use. My in-laws passed away. My father-in-law has an extensive rock collection that some of those stones were in the Smithsonian. So nobody in the family got to keep any of the rocks. They could buy them and the money could go back into the trust. But right now they're looking for a dealer to give value to them so that money goes back, into the main pool.
So I know you probably have already hit this before, but when dealing with what is the biggest benefit to having a real estate or a property, basically, all of your assets in a trust?
Well, again, it's worth repeating. When the property is held in a trust, there is a written directive from the owner, the deceased, how they want this distributed, because they're not all things are equal. For instance, I very close to a family where one of the siblings has been suffering with drug abuse for several years, decades actually, over 20 years. And it was in the trust that if this individual was still suffering from drug addiction, that he is not to get any money. His money will be divided to his 3 children, because it's not wise to give this person that kind of money. The parents do not want to keep perpetuating that person's addiction, and that can happen. So again, in the trust, it's saying, I want this one to have this, I want that one to have this. It's all spelled out, so nobody is trying to make these decisions after the fact. That's the other thing with a written directive. That's also the medical directive. A medical directive is in there to take the burden off of people. When my mom was in hospice and passing with, it was a very, very painful, challenging process. And she fortunately had told us, I want to be cremated. So my brother and I didn't have to have a debate about what we were doing. She told us, and that was already, arranged. My brother and I, as close as we are, we see things very differently. So in that medical directive, we had a do not resuscitate. She was dying of lung cancer. Her situation was never going to get better. So if, God forbid, she went into cardiac arrest, we already knew, do not resuscitate her. Let it go. So these are very important things, and that could be a horrific fight if you didn't have that in writing.
No, I completely understand. I completely relate. I went through a similar situation with my father this last year, who was on life support. They said, get out here now if you want to see him. And we didn't know. Nobody asked the questions, and it wasn't in writing. So, luckily he came out of this situation, but it put everybody in a very, there was different opinions from different siblings. Like I thought one way, my brother and sister thought something else. So, it does.
Yeah. And that's why I keep saying it's the most loving thing you can do for your family is to put that together. Do not put them in that situation if you don't have to, because it's unfortunate. Sometimes families are torn apart after the passing of parents because of material objects that there was no guidance on how to get rid of it. And then everyone's opinion of the same situation comes up, and they're all completely different.
So once a property is, okay, so say the person has passed, this property is in a trust. What is the process to sell the asset? Is it different than it is? Obviously, it's different than it is for a probate asset, correct?
Correct. Yes. Well, what happens is the person that's basically in charge of the trust, the trustee, and I'll use a real life example, because a lot of times, when the property is in a trust, if the creators of the trust have now become incapacitated, and now there's somebody making these financial decisions about their property and how to care for them, there's a lot of things that can be done. For instance, my husband has a good friend that there's 12 children in the family, and Mom and Dad owned a spectacular house in Eagle Rock, California. It was an old mansion. It was 7 or 8 bedrooms, and 2 of the siblings were living there that were suffering from drug and alcohol abuse and had been taking advantage of Mom and Dad. So the trustee of the trust had the huge task of getting them out of the home, and they put the house. And some of the siblings said sell the property, and the the executive of the trust said, no, we're not going to sell the property. The market's too low right now. We don't need to sell it. Let's rent the property out. So they ended up renting out individual rooms in the house. It was actually brilliant. They were making about $6,000 a month, which covered mom and dad's assisted living bill, and the house appreciated over $300,000 the 5 years that they had it as a rental. So he was the decision maker on behalf of mom and dad had trusted him to make these decisions. So it's not always a given that the property will be sold, and that's kind of a bit, well, that's a dramatic example because, again, this was back in 12 that this happened, and the market was very low, and everything recovered, as you know, pretty spectacularly. So that was a fantastic decision that he made because it, again, mom, there was income coming in. So mom lived a good, 5 or 6 years after dad passed. So this was a burden for the family, because it was a big financial thing, and they had the funds to take care of her. And now mom has passed a little while ago, and now they're liquidating the property at a substantial amount more. And it worked out much better for everybody. So sometimes the property, it will be decided the property sold right away, and sometimes not. Sometimes there's some other reason to keep the property, or somebody in the family agrees to buy the property and the family can come to terms and do that. I've had that happen too, where a fella, mom passed, but she had owned the house, 40 plus years, and her property taxes were under, in California, we have a thing called Prop 13. So the property taxes on that house were less than $1,000 a year. And it made sense for the sibling to buy the house. So he bought all the siblings out and he got to inherit mom's low property tax. So that was kind of a cool little thing for him.
I guess every situation is different depending on, what the end goal is, I guess, and who's all involved.
It is. And that's where a good real estate agent can help guide and direct a person when they're in that situation. They can, give them the market value. They can, let them know, hey, this might not be the best time to be selling the house because of this reason. There's so many different variables. So it's sometimes it's kind of hard to speak in general because this is it can be so personal based on the people's their situations.
So if I'm in this situation and I'm looking for a real estate agent, what are 3 traits that you would say that I should look for in a real estate agent to deal with this type of transaction?
Well, one of the first ones is somebody that is going to sit down with you and really listen to what the situation is. Selling somebody's property that's in a trust or an estate sale from a trust or probate, it's not a regular real estate transaction. It's highly emotionally charged in most cases, and there's a lot of moving parts because of all the different people. And there's resources that are needed. Sometimes the heirs are faced with having to literally completely empty out a household with 50 years of stuff in it. That is no small task. So they need resources of somebody to haul the dead branches out of the backyard because grandpa got too old to take care of the yard. Where do you donate things? Because they're not really, it's not something you're going to do at a garage sale, but it's still a good, useful thing like walkers and crutches and, items that were necessary but still can be used. Or there's also, a real estate agent that would have resources for the family, like estate sale people, again, painters. There's just such a laundry list of things that are potentially needed because sometimes the people don't live in the same state that their parents' home is or their deceased property is in.
So actually, you're falling right into my next question. Should you always rehab the asset to make sure you get the most money for the property?
And great question. In some cases, it can be a situation where you're throwing good money after bad, and you have to be alert to the fact that if you start getting into a rehab project, you actually take on liability for the work that's being done. So if somebody's doing an electrical system and they don't do it quite right, and when that new homeowner buys the home and there's a problem, they're going to boomerang back to you. That being said, it is very wise. When one of the last houses we just sold, I had the property staged by a professional stager. And what we did is we had a termite inspection done before the house was put on the market. So we identified all the trouble spots that we knew we would have to deal with. So that was known up front. In a lot of cases, it is a good idea to paint and possibly recarpet. Like, for instance, let's say somebody had a pet and the pet had its way with the carpeting for too many years. It's a good idea to do simple things to the home, but I would not necessarily recommend, remodeling kitchens or things like that, because in a lot of cases, the family may not have the time, resources to do that, because maybe all the funds are tied up in the property, or what's left in the bank account is needed to make the mortgage payment. Mm-hmm. Because they, either way, trust, probate, you still have to settle the deceased. You have to pay off all their debts first. You don't get to cash the money and tell all the creditors too bad. Everybody has to be.
That sounds like a good plan.
Yeah. That all has to be reconciled. So in a lot of cases where there is a mortgage left on the loan, on the property, the administrator, whoever is, they're taking care of that mortgage payment. They're paying their bills. They're settling the debts. And again, if there isn't a big pool of money, there might not be the resources to do a big job. And so in some cases, it's better to just sell the house as it is, but not always.
Are the days on market typically in line with standard real estate transaction, or are there other things to consider when it's either in a probate or a trust?
Well, okay, so days on market, for instance, in a probate, there are some timelines that need to be met. And again, from state to state, that's going to vary a little bit. So for just broad stroke, a probate, yes, can go fairly quickly. However, there are timed things that have to happen through the court. So there is, sometimes you have to wait a little while for court approval, depending on the state or area that you're in. And that can take a little more time. But in the case of a property that's held in trust, no, the market time would be just like any other property. It would be determined on the condition of the property and what the market is doing at that time. The last 4 or 5 years, the market's been very hot, and most properties that are priced right, they sell quickly. So it's not a big deal. So a trust, that was a good question. A probate, yes. There could be some other time parameters that are not typical to a property held in trust or just a standard real estate transaction, because again of the court approval that's necessary to have.
And so once let's just say, we have this property, there's offers been made on it. I want to accept it, or the family does, or whoever's handling the situation. What comes next?
Now, speaking to which property, probate or trust?
Oh, so they would be different.
Yes. In a probate, if there's court approval, the offer has to go to the judge for final approval.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
But not in all probate situations. So it depends. So there are probate sales where there's court approval that's needed and non-court approval. So there's again, depending on what the situation is, it can take a little time. Again, in a trust, no court approval necessary. It is completely up to the trustee that's in charge of the estate to make those decisions.
So what is the biggest piece of advice you can give a potential client that is put in either a trust or a probate situation? What would that piece of advice be? If you just had the biggest piece of advice you could give somebody, what would it be?
Well, again, in the trust situation, there's not a whole lot to advise on other than what is the best way to sell the property? Meaning, do we come in and have it repainted, recarpeted? It would be more of a marketing thing. In a probate, again, they're going to need to contact a probate attorney, with the exception of Wisconsin and California. It's not required, but highly recommended. And then from there, the process basically is already set for you. You have to do what the process is for probate. Again, there's a judge presiding over the whole situation, and you have to be accountable to a third party to make sure that everything's done appropriately. Where again, in a trust, you don't have to. So I would say, in either case, you want to consult with the appropriate professionals that can help guide you through the process. And in both cases, you're going to be talking with, if you're selling, you're going to be talking with a real estate person. I always recommend, if there's an accountant, most times there is an accountant attached to the deceased. So you would like to get in touch with the accountant and let them know what's going on. And then, of course, and even in a trust, it's a good idea to go back and talk to, hopefully the trust attorney that put the trust together is still living. But if not, seek out a trust attorney and just go over the basics with them so you know that you're doing the job that you've been put in charge of properly.
I have just one final question for you. So if somebody in the California area, or in your target area, wanted to get a hold of you, maybe it be for a probate or a trustee sale, or maybe it's just to either buy a house or sell a house, any kind of real estate transaction, how would somebody get a hold of you or your team?
Well, my cell phone is always good, which is 661-755-1960. And of course, my email is terrific, which is Tracy, TRACY, at tracyteam.com. So Tracy at tracyteam.com. And of course, my website is also a good source as well, which is tracyteam.com.
Well, Tracy, I know I asked you a lot of questions, but you have so much information with 30 years in the business. I know I probably wore you out a little bit, but I really appreciate your time today. Your information is so valuable, and I love how passionate you are, and you have a big heart, and it really comes out in your answers.
Oh, thank you so much, Alicia. I appreciate the opportunity to do this with you. And I do hope it helps one person avoid a landmine unnecessarily. So again, like so many things in life, just a little bit more education can guide people through situations more peacefully.
I totally agree. Well, again, I really appreciate your time. All right, guys, you've heard from Tracy Hauser, and this is your host, Alicia Dibrell from Insight Media. Till next time.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.